Let's start with our next topic, working with JSP standard action or action methods. Here we look at JSP standard action elements, list of JSP standard action elements, JSP expression language or EL, and EL implicit objects. The standard action elements are basically the tags that can be embedded into a JSP page. During compilation, they are also replaced by the Java code that corresponds to the predefined task. Action tags can be written only in XML syntax and can be used for communication. Here are a list of standard JSP action elements. Forward include plugin, param, fallback, set property, etc. The useBean tag is used to interact with the JavaBean component using standard tags in a JSP page. So we have a useBean, the ID, the scope, whether it is scope to this page, scope to the request, scope to the current session or the application itself, and the name of the class. So the ID specifies the attribute name of the bean, location of the bean is specified by the scope attribute, and the class attribute specifies the fully qualified class name. The set property tag is used to store data in the JavaBeans instance. The name attribute specifies the name. This must match the ID attribute used in the useBean tag, and the property expression can be represented as follows. Property equal to star indicate we want to map all the values in the current JSP page form to fields that are there in a JavaBean class, and respective properties can also be mapped in this manner. The get property tag is used to retrieve a property from a JavaBean instance and display in the output stream. The name attribute specifies the name of the JavaBean instance, and this must match the ID attribute in the useBean tag. The action tag is used to insert the output of another JSP page into the current JSP page. The syntax is as follows: JSP include page equal to relative URL and flush true. This syntax is used to pass information to the including resources. JSP include page equal to relative URL flush equal to true, and if you have any parameters to pass, you can provide them in a JSP : param tag. Let's look at the include directive versus the include action. The include directive includes the source code, so it is static. Include directive is an attribute for file. It can be written in HTML or XML. It can include source code of a JSP and HTML but not Servlet. We can't pass the expression as a value to a file. Include action includes the output, so it is dynamic. It has an attribute for page. It can be written in XML syntax. It can include the output of Servlet, JSP and HTML. We can pass the expression as a value to the page attribute. JSP EL allows you to create arithmetic expression and logical expression. It uses integers, floating point numbers, strings, built-in constants, and null. For example, dollar of expression. So here you see dollar of length into width is an expression that will get evaluated. Here are the EL implicit objects. The page scope, which provides access to variables stored in the page. Here we can access variables stored in the request, session, application scope. This gives us access to parameter values through getParam. We can also access param values. Here we can access the header strings, header values collection. Init param, which is used as context initialization parameter. Cookie maps the given cookie name to the cookie value, and page context. Let's look at a demo of writing a JSP program to demonstrate JSP standard action elements. A JSP action tags are used to perform certain operations like include, forward, or set, as we saw. In this demo, we will look at how reflection API works and how a JSP can be reflected onto a Pojo class, which is a plain old Java object, directly using action tags. I'm going to open up a simple registration page with a form. Here you can see that there are fields like first name, age, email, password, etc. There is a checkbox and a select option with a submit button. We will now create a Pojo class on which we will reflect the form fields inside the class and the action tag that we will use, which will automatically call the setter methods of all the fields in the Pojo class, and it will also keep the object in the session, page, request or application scope accordingly. As per conventions, we have ensured that all the field names in the form are in lowercase. We'll create in our project a new package. We'll call the package com.to for transfer object, because this is going to hold the values that will be transferred from this form. We'll add a new class. We'll call it user. We'll add the data members of the class, and the reflection API will automatically internally convert the values from the fields in the text box to the individual values and data types that are required here. First name, age, which will be integer, email. These are the same fields we declared in the form. Password, gender, which was the radio button, hobby, which was the checkbox, and finally country, which was the drop down list. We'll create getters and setters. Source, getters and setters. So let me select inside the class and now select all and OK. So I have my getters and setters created for all the properties. We'll add a default constructor which is mandatory. So we'll say private user, always a best practice. We'll generate our toString method. So let us say source, and this will help to create and return and print all of the values so that we do not have to individually print them in the JSP. Now let's come to our register.jsp page. Here let us add a simple scriptlet. Here we'll say if request dot get parameter register not equal to null, okay, we'll open another scriptlet here which will hold the closing bracket. This will hold this if condition, and here we will now say JSP use bean ID we will give as user, class will be com.to.user. We'll just hit the control button, and if you are able to click on this and it generates a proper link, indicates it has picked up the correct path to the Java Bean class. We now have to, by default the scope is going to be page scope, in which it will store this user object information. If we want to change it, we can say scope equal to, let's say, the request object. So now all the data entered in the form will be converted into an object of type user and associated with our user class. Now let's map this particular JSP so that it will call the setter for every property that we have inside our class. So the name will be user, and property we'll keep it as asterisk. So all the values in the form will be mapped to the variables inside the Java Bean class called user, and this is the line of code that will call the setters for every property and assign the values. And finally, since we are using the request scope, we will call the forward method, so we can forward and keep the request object alive, and we will forward to register servlet. Let's add a new package. com.controller. The servlet will play the role of the controller in the model view controller design pattern. We'll name the servlet as register servlet. Move next. We'll keep only the service method. We'll import com.io, or rather com.to.user. We'll come to the service method, and here we'll read data from the user object equal to, we'll typecast the object as user and retrieve it from, we had stored the information in the request scope, so we'll get it from the request object by passing the same attribute user. We'll create the print writer object equal to response dot get writer and out dot print, and let's print in an h3 tag your details plus the user object. Since we already have overridden toString there, the user object will return all the data to us. And that should be good enough. We'll go to the JSP page, which is the register page, and execute it. So our form should come up. Oops. So com.to.user, you can see here, is what it is telling us that we need to set up. So let's go here. So it's properly opened up this particular class, which indicates the registration is fine. Let's look at what it says. In the register.jsp, the value of user bean class attribute is invalid. Okay, now there could be some mismatch between the attributes that we have provided. So we had a fname, age and email. Fname, age, email. We have password, gender. So let's check for that. Password, gender. We have hobby and country. So here we have hobby and country. Let's come back to our servlet. Here we have imported com.to.user. We are retrieving the user value and simply printing it. So let's look at the JSP use bean tag again that we have used. So we have set ID equal to user, class equal to com.to.user, scope is request, the name again of the set property is user. That's what we have assigned in the ID, and we are calling a register servlet on the page forward. So let's save this, come to the user class again. Let's make the constructor as public so that it can be accessed. The default constructor should be public. And we'll execute. So let's just run through what we did. We had a register.jsp page where we created a simple form and we provided name values for each input element. We then said that the moment somebody clicks or the user clicks on the register button, we will map this form to a simple Java bean called the user class that we created. And all the properties that we have created in the user class, the setters will be triggered for that, and the values from the text boxes will be mapped to the user object inside the user class. In the user class, we had created setters and properties based on the names that we actually had in the JSP page. The values here as data members exactly map to the names that we created for the input controls in the JSP page. We had made the constructor as well public so that we do not get any errors on execution which could say that the object of this class could not be created. So this is essential that we have a public default constructor in the class, and then we have getters and setters and a toString method that is overridden to print the values. In the servlet class, we are actually picking up the user object from the request, since we had stored it in the request scope, and we simply print the details as an output. So the moment we run this, we get the form. Let's enter data into the form. The moment we enter data into the form, the data will be stored in the scope of type request. We'll add a password. We'll select the gender. We'll select some hobbies and the country and say register. And you see the data actually gets stored automatically into the user class object and gets outputted, and this is because of the mapping that we did of the JSP class, or rather the JSP page, to the Java bean, which is the user class. And the mapping here was done using the tag which was JSP set property.